Hi, David. Thanks for coming back. How have you been doing?
I've been doing okay. I've been doing mostly good.
Good to
Thanks.
hear.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm just going to start out by kind of touching on what we covered last time. So we talked about your mom and how she continues to have a lack of boundaries in your life, and some feelings came up, specifically you feeling inadequate in that area. And we also talked a little bit about your career and some of your self-worth surrounding that area of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to draw a parallel between how you feel about, the inadequacy you feel surrounding the relationship with your mom,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the lack of self-esteem you have surrounding some of your great accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
So something that I asked you to do before we left was to kind of be an observer of your life in the context of this relationship. And I sent you that checklist so that when you had interactions with your mom, you could just briefly check off some feelings you were having. So were you able to work on that exercise over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I was.
How did it go?
It went good. It was interesting. I felt, at times, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this, and then at other times I was like, oh, this is kind of cheesy, because I was like, oh, I'm sitting here checking off feelings, and it just felt weird and kind of, I don't know. I mean, I knew it was, and here I am, like, coming in pain for asking for the help, and it just felt like weird and cheesy. So I don't know.
Well, that's okay. I appreciate you being honest about it. I think that's an interesting response. I sense a little bit of sarcasm from you. So maybe you can tell me a little bit more about that. What kinds of feelings came up for you, like surrounding, I guess, the activity? Where do you think your resistance comes from?
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't really know where my resistance comes from.
Well, because on one hand, you've made it really clear that you would like to work on this specific goal of being able to coexist with your mom,
Mm-hmm.
but then you're given a tool to do it, and it seems like there's a disconnection there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I do see that, and I don't know why that is. There is a little bit of a disconnection there, though.
Okay. Well, I think we can both at least agree that that's still a goal for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. I do want to do it, and I do, I am still here to accomplish that.
Okay. So I think what we could do today is maybe come up with a specific goal for you to work on related to the struggles you're having with your mom. So what I wanted to talk to you a little about first was boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me what kinds of thoughts or ideas come into your mind when somebody says boundary?
I think of when somebody says boundary, I mean, I try to relate it to, because I've heard that word thrown around a lot, like a line, a property line on somebody's house. It's like a boundary, and obviously my property is my property, and the neighbor's property is his property, and what divides it is the boundary.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. That's a lot of people's response, I think, to ideas surrounding that word. So what I'd like to do is just give you kind of a different perspective on that. Is that okay?
Sure.
So really all a boundary is telling somebody who we are. So if I have a boundary that, if I'm around people who wear a lot of perfume, I get a horrible headache. So my boundary is not, making people feel bad about that, but maybe telling people that I can't be very close to them. I can't sit next to them if that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not necessarily telling the person they can't sit next to me or they can't be in the same room as me. It's just telling somebody who I am,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I don't think people look at it a lot in that way. So another thing about boundaries is that, you know, with somebody like your mom, you were dependent upon her at one time, and she's someone who consistently crosses your boundaries. So that can be a really mixed message, I guess, as a child, for you to be dependent upon someone who continues to cross your boundaries, because at that time you don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, does that bring anything up for you?
Yeah, I mean, she, you know, yeah, I mean, it does kind of create some confusion.
Right.
You know, as I become an adult, and I'm not particularly dependent on her anymore, but
right.
It still seems like that breach of I guess, my boundaries.
Right, and that's exactly right, is that now you are an adult, so you're no longer dependent upon her, so now boundaries are possible.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might be something that would be good for you to work towards as one of your first goals. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really never set any quote-unquote boundaries with her, so I mean, I think that's part of the whole issue, is I don't really know where to set them in, even, I guess, particularly up until this point, really what they are.
Okay, well, great. Let's work on that a little bit right now then. So, I want you to try to think of a fairly safe situation to where we could maybe practice this goal. So can you think of an example in your life of a boundary your mom crosses with you that is a pretty safe situation for you? Not too confrontational.
I mean, she calls a lot, so that's something that, you know, happens a lot, and, you know, it's not too confrontational, because if it gets horrible, I can always just hang up the phone. Okay. And a lot of times it's actually what I do. I either, you know, don't answer or hang up or whatever.
Well, that would be a great place to start, I think. So the goal would be that you would create a boundary surrounding the phone with your mom. Does that make sense?
Mm.
Okay, so why don't you tell me right now, without the boundary, what a phone call with your mom would look or feel like?
Well, most of the time I just don't answer. And oftentimes then when I don't answer, because I'm trying to just avoid her, quite frankly, because when I do answer the phone, it becomes this, as I've been, you know, as we talked about in the first session or so, it's just this barrage of questions and, you know, really uncomfortable situation for me, and it never kind of seems to change. So a lot of times I won't answer the phone, and then she'll call my girlfriend, and then she'll call my daughter if neither one of us answer the phone. So it's just, that's very typical.
Right, okay. So your response now, without the boundary, would be avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
And much. Does that work as a boundary?
Well, no, because then it just trickles down and it affects other people, and that's not fair to them.
Okay. So our goal would be to come up with a strategy other than avoidance. Is there another scenario that occurs, maybe the opposite of avoidance? Do you ever answer the phone?
Yeah. And
what happens in that case?
She just barrages me with questions that are really not welcome. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they're just, you know, things about, like I said before, when we spoke a time or two ago about my business, you know, how she just went to my events and she just kind of makes herself feel welcome with questions about my events or showing up at places, and that is very typical. And then it becomes just frustration, and I, you know, lash back out at her, and she is like, I can't believe you're doing this because I'm your mom, and it just is just a muddled mess.
Okay, so the other response you have, which is your part, is that you would lash out or become angry.
Mm-hmm. Or defensive or whatever.
Okay. So, if those two strategies are not working for you now, can we agree on that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, that's why I'm here.
So, What are some ideas you have that could be a boundary that don't include those two things?
What is a response I could have that could be a boundary that don't include those two
And
things?
remember that a boundary is telling someone who you are.
Yeah, just, telling her that these questions are not welcome or something like that. I mean that's the only thing that I can think of.
I think that sounds great.
Yeah.
So, so your boundary would be, if your mom calls you, you would answer the phone or get back to her promptly as soon as you could. And then if she begins to become overbearing and ask the questions, your response would be, your questions are not welcome.
Yeah, I think that would. I could try that.
How does it feel to even imagine yourself doing that?
Well, it feels somewhat scary, but also somewhat empowering to let her know, just to I guess communicate to her that she's crossing a boundary. It's something that I've never really done. Those words that we're coming up with right now seem very simple, but I've never said them before.
Yeah. And that can be scary. I understand, when I'm about to do something maybe I've never done before, I feel almost paralyzed. But then once I do it, I do feel that sense of empowerment, like you're talking about. And that sounds like something you've wanted for a long time.
Yeah, I really do.
Okay. So what then if you've set your boundary? Typically when people who are not good with boundaries have a boundary set for them, their response can sometimes be to increase the pressure or become angry themselves. What might you do in that situation?
Well, that's a great question.
Okay, so let's try to think of another step in this goal that we could take, specifically surrounding the goal of, having a boundary in the phone call. So you've now said your questions aren't welcome, and then she pushes harder. What do you say now?
Just, you're starting to make me feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
I mean, that would be something that I've never said before, that I think might be another option if she doesn't respond to your questions or your comments or whatever are not welcome. And I'm respectful and polite in saying that, and try to be, try to say that. So, you're making me uncomfortable. What you're saying right now is making me feel uncomfortable.
I think that sounds great. And remember that boundaries are telling someone who we are, and that's all you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think, I could be wrong, but it seems like if you start to implement these small steps in your life, you could experience a lot of relief in the areas of feeling inadequate or not worthy of the success you've experienced, because you will be empowering yourself, because you'll be telling her who you are. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think a third step that I might want to include in this goal is when to end the call. So do you feel like that might be the next action step towards that goal? If she still continues to push, what might you do?
How to
then?
wrap it up without screaming and yelling and kicking and fussing. Yeah. How might I do that?
Yes.
Another good question. Besides just hanging up the phone.
Well, maybe, with the idea of telling her who you are, try to think of a response. You've now asked her twice to stop the questions, and you've let her know how you're feeling, and she's not changing. So tell her who you are with a third statement that would end the call. Something
to the effect of, I feel as if I need to take a break right now, and maybe we can continue this conversation later.
I think that sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So, can you just summarize for me the 3 steps that you are going to take this week surrounding the goal of having a boundary with your mom on telephone calls?
Yeah, facing it and answering the calls is obviously step 0, but step 1 is, telling her if she begins with the comment or the questions and the being overbearing, to let her know that her, questions, or if she has passive aggressive or snide comments, to say your questions or your comments are not welcome, and, obviously doing everything politely. And number 2 would be to let her know that if she continues, her comments or questions are making me feel uncomfortable. And then 3 would, if that doesn't help, to tell her that I'm feeling as if I need to take a break from this conversation, and maybe we could pick up this conversation at a later time.
That sounds great.
Okay.
So that's something I'd like for you to work on this week. And then if it's okay with you, we can meet again next week and check in and see how it went. And, either alter the goal or move on to the next one.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, great. Thanks, David.
All right, thank you.